So I asked her if she would come and do a talk for us, and she said yes, and so I'm so excited. And her name is Dr. Marguerite McInnis.
I wanted to do some research on corsets because I am, as a docent, I'm wearing a corset, of course. But I was actually shocked to learn that women started wearing corsets in the 15th century. So that meant in the 1400s, women were already constricting their bodies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and get my notes to be sure that I don't forget anything. Probably won't. So women had already started compressing their bodies in the 15th century. But what really solidified women's quest for a different body was when Catherine de' Medici in 1510 announced that, and this is a direct quote, "Thick waists are banned from court." Wow. So you better be skinny and you better have a tight corset or you're banned from court. So of course this, the French being, of course, the arbiters of style, this went through all the courts, and of course you still had some upper class women also. So that started women wearing corsets for 500 years. So women started wearing corsets again in the 15th century, and the revolution, second revolution, occurred after World War I. And I'm hoping I will have enough time. I'm trying to limit myself to 45 minutes so that I can talk about what happened after. Of course, women's fashions changed over 500 years, naturally. The corset also changed. So if you watch the PBS program Sanditon, that was during the time actually of Jane Austen and Napoleon, the body shape changed. So you did not want the tiny waist, you didn't want a waist at all. The silhouette was straight down, and the corset came under the bust to push it up. If you think back on any portraits, you might have seen that was a square neckline. So that also, of course, went out of fashion and sort of morphed into the Victorian era. So corsets were longer, they were shorter, they covered the bust, they pushed the bust up. But nonetheless, the basic components of all corsets, no matter what they were doing to your body, were the same. All corsets were made of a very sturdy and strong material, usually cotton or linen. They all had laces so that your lady's maid could get your waist to be 18 inches if possible. And later on it had metal snaps. Mm-hmm. And of course stays. So my stays in my corset are made of metal, but the stays were originally made of whalebone. In the 15th century, the stays, if you can believe this, were made of wood. So I don't know how you could stand, but you couldn't sit very comfortably, of course. I have some extra material here on the table about the history of corsets because I could speak for 45 minutes just about the history of the corset. Yes?
I have a question. You said, you know, the laces in the back. Supposing that you were a single woman, or was this mostly just the elite people who had maids to lace them up?
If you were not working, if you were, say, of the merchant class, you would have a maid to help you. She might do other jobs around the house, or you would have a daughter to help you get the laces. My laces stayed pretty much in the same place. So thank you, that was a very good question. I'm next, anyway, I have quite a bit of history on the table which I can share with you, or I can pass that around after because there's a lot of technical information each century of what happened in the corset, how it changed, what was the construction. So again, I wanted to move on to the bustle. And then I'm going to talk about my own clothing. The bustle actually started to be popular in 1870 and actually continued into the late Victorian era. And it had many different shapes and forms. But I'm only going to show you a photograph of one or a print of one because I think it's the most gorgeous and most beautiful. All right, this is a beautiful exhibition that was at the Legion of Honor, where I'm also a docent in the print study room. This is James Tissot. I could have lived in the museum. I wish I could have camped out in the museum so that I could be surrounded by these gorgeous, gorgeous paintings. So this is at the beginning of the time and of the bustle. So this would check the dates of these paintings. So he painted these in 1872 and 1873. When you get your handout, though, I want you to look at two things. I want you to look at the amount of material that all these beautiful young women are wearing. Look at this and think, how did they support that? And how much did this weigh? I'm telling you, I wore at least 5 pounds of clothing today, and this weighed a lot more. Now, they are dressed very fancily because they are at a formal dinner or a ball. And how did they support this? How did all women support this type of bustle with a cage? And I'm going to pass this out to you also. So in addition to everything, I'm going to take off quite a bit of my clothing so you can see what I'm wearing underneath. When you get this, I'd like you to look at, this is the lacing part that went around the waist. This is the back that went down the back of the legs. And then this is the cage that supported that amount of material. Inside the cage, there are ties. And so you could tie these so that it would collapse when you sat. But think about sitting in this.
Yeah.
It was all for beauty. It was all for beauty. Every single woman who dressed in a corset did this for vanity. It was just amazing to me that for 500 years women felt that in order to be attractive, they had to be dressed like this or dressed like that and wear multiple layers of clothing.
Was the bustle underneath the skirt?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so what you pointed to us, she would have had a bustle underneath and then that just came down from the dress.
So she put this on around her waist before she put on her dress.
Okay.
So the dress is flowing over the cage.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Did lower class women wear bustles and corsets?
Yes, they did. And servants wore, they probably would have worn a much abbreviated cage, but they also wore corsets. All women, yes. Even on farms for corset. The other thing I'm going to do in my talk today is I'm going to disrobe, even though there's a gentleman here and I'm thoroughly embarrassed. But I am, because my petticoat and my drawers are 120 years old, and I doubt very much if you'll go to any fashion show where someone is actually wearing the clothing. And then because I'm a docent in the Shin House, I have several costumes, and I'm used to walking around in this amount of clothing and also being tightly corseted. So right now I'm going to talk about what I'm wearing. So this would be what an upper middle class woman would be wearing during the day to go out and have tea with a friend or go to a museum. And not for formal wear, of course, because that was completely different. And I'm going to turn just a little bit so you can see that my dressmaker gave me, and I'm going to show you how she did this, the illusion of a bustle. So this is not a real bustle, but it looks almost like a real bustle. And everything else, and everything I'm wearing has a purpose. So my parasol, my gloves, my long sleeves, my hat were all designed to keep the sun away from my skin. Because if you were tan, if your hands are brown, if your face is brown, it meant that you're the working classes and you had to even work outside. So if you were upper or middle class or wealthy, you were covered up during the day at all times. Women, if they wanted to know what time it was, they wore, this is my timepiece, and it works really well, I really like it. This is not authentic, but it is a reproduction. So women either wore their timepiece as a necklace, as I'm doing, which I like, or you could wear it as a brooch. This is my reticule. Handbags were not used until much later, so I would carry to go out for an afternoon. I would carry a hanky. I would carry maybe some money, depending where I was going, to tea or museum. You never went out alone, of course. And smelling salts in case I fainted. Smelling salts. Yes, smelling salts were necessary at all times. So smelling salts are actually like could be a mixture of water and ammonia. So if that was waved under your nose, you would buy ammonia. So now I'm going to start taking off my clothes.
You need some help.
Okay, yes.
Also did and I went all the way there. Yeah.
My hat came from an 1890s pattern book. All my hats were made, so this is authentic to the period. As is my hat pins, I have a lot of hat pins. Okay, so we could start talking. This up over my head as best as you can. Well, I'm going to, before I talk about my petticoat, I wanted to show you how my dressmaker was able to give me the illusion of a bustle. So, look at this. That's what it took to get that effect of the bustle. Mm-hmm. All right, so there are at least 10 ties that go vertically and 2 that go horizontally, and it actually takes me half an hour to get this properly aligned. So we'll work this. And now I'm going to talk about my petticoat. My petticoat is actually 110 years old, and I bought this at my drawers also in an antique store in Niles. And I'm going to walk down this way too so you can see it. So this is all hand crocheted lace. It's just absolutely gorgeous. I just love wearing this. And then this is bobbin lace. It's just really, I really feel very privileged to wear this petticoat and also my drawers, because there are not very many articles of clothing that last 120 years, and they did. Okay, we need to do one more. I'm going to do one more. So these are also 120 years old, and these are very unusual drawers or bloomers because they have a panel, 2 panels. One panel that ties in the front, which I'm not going to do anymore. So one panel ties in the front, and then there's another panel that ties in the back. So most women's drawers or pantaloons just had a slit in the middle because you were using outhouses or chamber pots or whatever we didn't. We're all used to modern plumbing. But these are very, very unusual. And also, I was able to find antique ribbon. So to go with so these again will walk down here. About 5.5 pounds of clothing. So any questions before I start getting dressed?
Can you talk about the socks?
Well, the socks, Sarah's kind of coming down. The socks, stockings I actually bought at a Civil War reenactment. And the reason that they're striped is because during the 1860s, women were so totally constricted. They had the corset, they had numerous petticoats, they had the hoop, they had a petticoat over the hoop and so forth. So this was a little rebellion against their lifestyle to have striped stockings. And these are held up by garters. So any questions before I start getting dressed?
So how long would it take, even with the help of a maid, how long would it take to get dressed?
45 minutes. So for an evening gown, of course, you would have a much smaller chemise, but the evening gown would be lower cut, and you would have shorter sleeves and kid gloves that would go up to your elbow. Yes.
So there was no bra or brassiere as we know it?
Absolutely not. Okay. And no panties, no handbag either.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, when it was really, really hot.
Well, everything because it does get warm in Fremont, not like here, but especially when we're giving tours for special event day, the house is open from 12 to 4. So everything I'm wearing is made of cotton, because if it were synthetic material, I would be running with perspiration, because I am wearing a hat, not that, well, I have other hats. But you do get warm, especially if you're giving tours, you're walking around, and we have 2 flights of stairs. So I'm walking up and down stairs too. But what really, I have lived on the East Coast twice, and I do not know how, with that humidity, women could do anything. I mean, your clothes must have been just soaked with perspiration.
The fans.
Yes, yes.
What did women do during the menstrual cycle?
They had cloths and had to wash them out.
Mm-hmm.
And how did they attach them?
They had like a special belt that was designed just for that.
I would think a large busted woman, that wouldn't do much. So how did they get that effect?
If you were a large busted woman, I'm sorry.
Well, how would you support?
You're not supported. During the Victorian era, you're to be pushed down. Yes.
Okay.
So you see, my corset is coming over my bust.
Mm-hmm.
But in other periods, they wouldn't. It would come down here to push you out.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That's what it was.
But if you were large busted during the Victorian era, when you'd be wearing this type of corset, tough luck. You were. That's right.
Really bad.
You were in the corset.
Okay.
So you didn't have much choice.
Did women always completely undress, get out of all of this constriction at nighttime when they slept?
No, they could take it all off, and they had like a regular nightgown.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So that would be the one period of the day that they would be free.
Well, if you weren't going out until the afternoon, you really didn't have to put on your corset. They had beautiful dressing gowns that were very beautiful, very stylish, made of silk or brocade, depending on your social status. So then you could just wear some undergarment and then your dressing gown until you had to get dressed to go out wherever you were going. So actually, it's bigger on one, so I have to go around. You got
Want me to try it?
Well, you have to pull it through. I actually had it tied around my waist, but there is a zipper there, so you can push it on.
I don't think they were.
And I remember people were.
Oh, I see.
We were talking about the same thing. Our grandmothers wore big, my grandmother wore big corsets.
But didn't you wear a Merry Widow?
Oh,
I did in the 50s.
yeah, under a gown. Yeah. Remember the belts?
That's why.
Right, the Merry Widow, the strapless, yeah. That's the only time I had all these at one. Yeah.
So the last part of my talk, I think I have enough time, is to give you some handouts and talk about how women were freed from this. So the catalyst for this was World War I. So what happened again in both England and in France, so many men were being slaughtered in this horrible, ghastly war that women had to take over the jobs that men ordinarily would have. So women learned how to drive trucks, they learned how, of course they could drive an ambulance. Fortunately, because of Florence Nightingale, nursing was a real profession. They had to deliver the mail. If they came from a farming family, forget the corset, they had to work in the fields. She is a very stylish woman. This is 1913, and this is before the war actually started. Now, you might look at that and think, well, that doesn't look too badly. She doesn't have a thick, thin waist. She doesn't have a waist at all. And why not? Because she is wearing, ladies, the most horrible looking corset I have ever seen in my entire life. The corset, if you look at the silhouette of the dress, do you see any hips? Do you see a waist? No. And how did you achieve that? You had on a corset that went through, covered your entire body, all the way around almost your rear end, to have this straight silhouette of the dress. And look at her sleeves. Look at her enormous hat. So in 1913, could you do anything useful if you were upper class and dressed like that? Well, the answer is no. Of course you couldn't. How could you? But anyway, the war proceeded. Nursing became extremely important. If you look at the two young women who were nurses, you could see they are still wearing corset, but did not have to have a tiny, tiny waist. Their skirts actually were quite short, came down to about here, and this was, and of course, the fitted sleeve, very useful, utilitarian. They had a small hat, in total contrast to what was 1913. So now we're looking at 1915 during the war. So after the war, we had a revolution. Women did not want to go back to sipping tea, carrying their parasol around, being corseted, and going out with a friend to a museum. They had positions of real authority. And the revolution started just 2 years after the war, 1920. So the war ended in 1918, and this revolution had occurred just 2 years after. Women did not want to wear a corset. Women did not want to be just like a pretty doll that you took out at night. So there are revolutionary elements. There are 4 revolutionary elements to this dress that she was a very famous French designer. She's not well known today in the United States, but she was at that time. Her name was Madeleine Voinet, V-O-I-N-E-T. And actually, she had quite a long career. So raise your hand, or what are the revolutionary aspects of this dress from 1920, 2 years after World War II? Yes?
Short sleeves.
Short sleeves, absolutely. What else?
Short length. Short length.
Pardon?
Short length.
Ankles are showing.
Yes, you could see her ankles. Believe it or not, for 600 years, no man ever saw a lady's ankles unless you were married. So yes, it's at least 3 or 4 inches above her calf.
A blousey bodice.
Yes.
No gloves.
No gloves, no corset. And what else is revolutionary about that dress?
Two-piece.
Beautiful petal.
This was a bias cut, and that cut, it was called a petal dress, and that made her an instantaneously famous. She's wearing well, the dress fits her body naturally. There's no corset. And if you look very closely, you can see that she's wearing just like a natural little belt around her waist.
Oh, yeah.
So totally revolutionary. And then the last one, I got it, okay, yes, is the world famous Coco Chanel.
Coco Chanel.
Oh, yes. Chanel was taken maybe 4 years later. I absolutely adore this photograph. Chanel designed her shoes, her gloves, and her hat, and she introduced costume jewelry, so that's what she's wearing. And then, of course, her beautiful drop waist dress. I would love to have this too. But what I really, really love about this photograph is her self-confidence. She is a woman of the 20th century, and she's going places, and she knew it. So with that, I'm going to conclude my talk, and I don't know if you have any questions for me or anything.
But back then, who decided what would be changed about those cages and the bustles and all of that?
Well, you always have fashion designers.
So they were back then.
Yeah,
There just
exactly.
wasn't, it was more subtle, not like game changer like these.
Actually, I wanted to add one more thing about the bustle that looks about like this. So as the years progressed, women didn't want to wear a cage, and the bustles became smaller in a way, but they stuck out really far, and I did not find that really particularly attractive. But they still had to be supported. So in the late Victorian era, the bustle would stick out maybe this far. But you still had to wear support around your waist. So the cages, instead of being to the floor, would be this long, or in one of the photographs, it looked like the model was wearing like a real donut around her waist. But she still was wearing the corset, the petticoat, and everything else that I'm wearing. She had to wear some kind of support around her waist because the bustles were a lot of material. They had to be supported, otherwise they just flopped down. So and I personally did not find that extremely attractive. So I just concentrated on 1872, 73, which I thought that was the most beautiful and the fun. But no, you had fashion designers or ladies who would go to their dressmaker and say, well, I'm tired of that shape bustle, can you think of something else? And they would, of course, come up with it, and then everyone would see that, they would all want to have a bustle like whatever, and they changed.
So one thing that I sort of noticed is that
this was, Coco Chanel was about 1920,
1924.
24.
Yes.
So the 20s, 100 years ago, women got the right to vote. I mean, this was all the way revolutionary, a lot more than, the dress was just one aspect of the changes that were happening with women.
The other thing too, because I love history so much, after World War II, after World War I, there was tremendous social upheaval in Europe. The three dynasties that had ruled Europe for centuries, the Habsburgs in Austro-Hungary, the Hohenzollern in Germany, and the Romanov in Russia were gone. You had unemployment. Cities in Europe were completely destroyed. And just because women had the vote did not mean that all men accepted it. They didn't. So there was hostility in a way towards women. So it was a time of tremendous social upheaval. And we're just lucky that democracy survived, because the great fear in all the European capitals was that there'd be a Bolshevik revolution, and the Civil War in 1920 was still going on in Russia. So somehow good prevailed. So.
Thank you very much.